there. Welcome to our podcast, Africa to the World, where we tell African stories to transform people's lives. I am Yvonne.
And I'm Shami.
And we are your hosts. So today we're still running with the theme Black Tax. Today's topic is Hunhu Christianity and Black Tax Dilemma, conversation with the millennials. So to kick off our conversation today, I'm going to start off with giving you something that we got when we were doing our research. One of the perspectives we came across is that from the look of things, the most common and undealt issue that we find in the African business sector is caused by poverty, bankruptcy, or financial struggle is mainly attributed to Black tax. So we are here to just dissect this topic because as from what I've just previously said, poverty is being linked to Black tax, bankruptcy is being linked to Black tax, financial struggles is being linked to Black tax. So today we've got a guest in the studio who's going to help us to dissect this topic and for us to move forward and to get results from us understanding what is Black tax. So Shamiso, what's your understanding of Black tax?
Okay, so I'm just gonna pull a definition straight from the internet, right? So,
Right.
black tax is a term used to describe the duty of a black child to support their extended family financially. This can be in the form of supporting elderly parents, educating siblings, building family homes, or funding sibling businesses. So that's the definition that I came across. And what I really loved about it was very expansive. So it covered a lot of things, not just what we typically think about when we hear the term black tax, which is giving financially to the people who raised you. But it also covers siblings, building homes, and things like that. So, Karen, can you tell us what you think about this definition of black tax and what you think about the short quote that Yvonne shared?
I mean, generally for me, black tax, like you said, we tend to think of it just as giving financial support to maybe your parents. But I think I would say predominantly it's as you defined it, it really is the support that you give to your family at large outside of your nuclear family. And a lot of it is usually because it's not necessarily money that's or financial support or support that's centered around you or yourself, but those outside of your household. So I would say that's what I think about it. And I will say it's within our societies as Black people generally, regardless of where you are in the world, it is something that affects us a lot more because we are generally previously and historically disadvantaged people. We've come in with no inheritance, no background, or um, wealth to fall back on. Essentially, in trying to build wealth within our current generations, there's a lot of support that needs to go back to the previous generation because they themselves never had a lot of benefits that our would have had, or other people would have had, other races. So, without unpacking too much at this stage, those are my thoughts on a high level.
And I really love how you've just mentioned previously disadvantaged, because that phrase is definitely key. With black tax, we tend to find it in your middle and lower class families. And so people who are in the upper class generally may not have an understanding or an appreciation of black tax and what it actually means, the type of effects that it has on the individual, because they already have that wealth to fall back on. Their parents or their siblings are not looking at them expecting them to be the provider in the home because that wealth is there. Um, but quick question, right? Let me dial it back a little bit. What do we think about the word tax? And this is a question for both of you guys.
Putting black and tax in the same sentence for me is absurd, because when we look at our issues or our race issues as Black people, we are always, it seems as if back from history we've always been disadvantaged with the mere fact that we are Black, but we should be celebrating that we are Black or Black excellence. But when you put tax for me becomes a burden. I start thinking about SARS, and I start thinking about, it's a burden, it's, I have to, it's a commitment that I am making whether I like it or not. SARS has to take its tax from everything that I earn. But at the end of the day, it doesn't sound to me like I am doing this out of the goodness of my heart. So when we put black and tax together in one statement, for me, it feels like a burden. I feel like I'm in a prison cell. I feel like I'm standing in front of a judge and I'm being judged that, you need to do one, two, three, four because this is expected from you. So it doesn't then have the connotations of it being a thing that you are giving. You are giving out of a place of love, or you are giving back, right? Not from a place of obligation, but from a place of understanding what this will mean for the next person and for generations to come. So for me, those are my thoughts on that.
I like that, Yvonne, and I like the way you put it because um, tax in itself, and obviously coming from a financial background, these are mandatory contributions that are basically imposed by the government or another entity for you to pay. You don't have a choice on whether or not you need to pay tax. The entity imposing the tax tells you how much you need to pay and at what date, and something bad will happen to you if you don't do it. So the moment we start referring to it as black tax, we're no longer referring to the gift that you're giving to your mother or the support that you're choosing to give to your siblings. We're talking about where it now feels like an obligation to be giving money because it's actually to some extent being imposed on you. And I guess that brings a bigger question where are we using that term correctly? Because I do know there are certain people who come from backgrounds where their families are actually imposing those requirements to say, you have to support your sister in school. So that becomes black tax. But where we are actually choosing to support, is it correct to use the term black tax? I don't know. It's very interesting because it definitely isn't necessarily a term that supports the meaning of you giving or gifting. It really becomes mandatory when you frame it that way.
So I would then say it sits on a continuum from what you guys have said. So we move from being in a place where we're giving because we love our family, we're giving because we want to help. It's genuine. Our giving is genuine. And then we move along this continuum onto the other side, which is the other extreme, where it's obligatory. We're no longer finding joy in this. And in some cases, it's exploitative, where you can see, Kuti, these people don't necessarily need the help or they don't need this amount. They're now just taking advantage of the fact that I'm there. And you have some parents within the African context who feel that once they've put you through school, they're done. It's now my duty to sit back and for you to take care of me. I'm not even trying to plan for my retirement. I'm not even trying to plan for the future because I have kids. Why should I continue to work when I'm now past retirement age when I have kids? So you should provide.
Just to throw a little bit of a spanner into the works, Shamiso, on that, when we want to look at it from a Christian perspective, right? When we look at what the Bible says genuinely about giving, but I'm just going to take you into the book of Timothy, but this is talking about widows, but it's actually still touching on this topic of black tax because it's got so many negative connotations. But if we dial it back a notch and then bring it back into the Word of God, we can get a little bit of an understanding on that. Because in First Timothy 5 verse 4, it says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. So essentially, black tax has been having for a number of years. We hadn't labeled it as black tax, or the practice of giving back to our families has had negative connotations. And I feel like from the word of God, it's saying that it is pleasing to God for us to actually take care of our parents, grandparents, people who have taken care of us. But it's become more of a burden because when we look at it, it's really the whole positive connotation about giving back should then stem from our parents teaching us from an early age I remember like the first time I did my very first job when I was still in high school, I was working at the local, agricultural show in my city in Kadoma. And I came back home and I was like, Mom, this is what I earned and I'm giving it back to you. And my mom was like, no, 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 it's yours. I mean, do whatever you want with it. But because I had seen what my older siblings had done, so what I did is I went and I bought something for the house because I understood that no, my older siblings, I saw them that the first salaries, they would come back home and give them back to mom. But mom just thought I was too young. But when I came back with the gift, she accepted it. And from that point onwards, I never saw giving back or helping back or um giving back to the people who've raised me or people who've helped me as a negative thing, but I saw it in the positive light. But it seems as if there are so many factors that have clouded the positivity of this practice, I would like to say, and made it seem as if it's a burden. Oh my gosh, I have to do this. There's no joy in doing this. It's obligatory and I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't get out of this black tax thingy. But I feel like it's the parents' obligation to teach children at a very young and tender age what it means to be giving, because this is pleasing to God. This is what God actually wants us to do. I know this Bible verse is talking about widows, but it's the same thing. It's talking about widows, parents, and grandparents who have taken care of you. So, whoever it is, there should be a positive connotation to the words or to the practice of black tax.
I think I like that, and I want to add to what you've just said, Yvonne, because even in I think it's First Timothy 5 as well, the Bible goes on to also say that anyone who doesn't provide for their family or their relatives, especially their own household, so this includes even outside of your household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So I think it's just really emphasizing the importance of charity beginning at home. But that said, like I said, if we're referring to black tax, I don't think we're referring to the act of giving in itself. I think if we're correctly using the term tax, we're saying it's something that's mandatory. You don't necessarily have a choice. So maybe we need to dial back and say, when we say black tax and we use that term tax, what is it that's made it so negative? Is it because there are families out there, like Shamiso, you were saying earlier, where a mother feels or a father feels entitled to their child's money? They have imposed mandatory requirements for a child to the point where it's actually crippling the child financially, where they're potentially being asked to support in a way, in areas where they themselves cannot afford to support. Is that what's made it so negative? Maybe. And I don't know what are your thoughts around this? Because giving itself, and even biblically, is something we're required to do. Providing for our family is something we're required to do as Christians. But when it becomes tax, that where the issue is.
So I love that y'all brought in the Bible because the Bible is always balanced, right? It doesn't give us one side and the scale is tipped terribly on one end. The Bible also says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. So isn't it then a case that as a people, we have failed to strike a balance where it's the parents working for their children and their children's children, yes, but also raising up children who are willing to provide for them or willing to give back in one way or another when they're now older and maybe their parents aren't able to provide for themselves anymore without it being an issue of obligation.
Yeah, you're so right about that, Shemiso. I think the biggest problem is in the expectation thereof. What are they expecting from you? It's from one of something that I came across as well was that there was a perspective that, parents expect that, okay, so now you have to build them a house. You have to buy them a new water pump. You have to buy dad a new car because you are working. So it's in the expectation of not understanding that, yes, by virtue, by right, give back, but also have that seed planted in your children's mind that, listen, give back to us, but take care of yourself because you also have children that are going to come in the future, or you currently have children that you then need to live an inheritance for, because it's in that what can I say, exaggerated expectation, or outrageous expectations that people then drown in debt, and people not being able to navigate that terrain and being able to clearly stand at what can they do and what can they not do, is making us sink down this wormhole whereby we are like, it's a burden. It's tax now. We've put the name tax because it's mandatory, it's an obligation, it's too much of a high expectation. If I don't do it, then I've done my family wrong. So that is where we are finding, I believe that is where this whole issue with it being tax is giving so much stress and contention with so many millennials today. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Karen?
I agree. And I think also there's this tendency generally of us sometimes not being honest and open with our parents about our achievements, and also not having the courage sometimes to be honest in saying, I cannot do something. So I think sometimes you might find as children we feel this need to make our parents believe that we're doing well. And sometimes parents are under the illusion that a child is doing very, very well. So they might actually throw certain burdens your way without realizing that it's something that you're not capable of doing. But I would like to think that any good parent does not desire to enslave their child or even have their child look after them. I mean, it's unfortunate, particularly for us in the setting of countries like Zimbabwe, because a lot of our parents don't have the pensions that are enough to support themselves. They lost a lot of their pensions, they lost a lot of their savings, and a lot of them actually sacrificed a lot of what would have become alternative forms of, or money for alternative forms of income in trying to educate us. And it is very evident because some of us are doing well, others of us have opportunities we would not have had if our parents had not made certain sacrifices. But that said, I would like to think that most parents would love to be independent and not have to rely on their children. Although in some cases, other parents might think otherwise. But I would like to think any parent that generally feels entitled to their child and feels that their money, their child's money is their money, is a lazy parent. God forgive me.
Wow.
They probably were never hardworking.
Whoa.
Well, let's be honest. They were probably never hardworking. It's true. Because if you were a hardworking parent who also has been a child, you've been in the position where your child is, you'd be more understanding of when a child cannot do certain things. You'd understand. And even it doesn't feel good. I mean, think about it. I don't think it feels good to be able to ask your child every month, "Wanangu, I need money for bread. Oh, I don't have money for toiletries." It's not a nice feeling, particularly if you've been independent for your entire career. Let's just say a lot of them have worked for 50 years plus. So it's not something they enjoy. And sadly, you'll see this because some parents will suffer quietly without even reaching out to their children for help because they don't want to burden their children. But I think it's important to be in a position with your have a relationship with your parents in such a way that you can be open about where you are financially, give them the helping hand they need where they need it, but also them knowing where your limits are without having to throw out like extra burdens on top of you. So if you're very transparent, you might find that they won't necessarily ask you to pay fees for your sister's child because they'll know, okay, yes, she can afford to send me groceries. Yes, she pays for my airtime or whatever. But any other burden outside of this is a lot for them. But if you give your parents the impression that, oh my gosh, you're raking it and life is great, you might find certain things being thrown on you and it starts to feel like a tax because you're actually not able to manage, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Definitely makes sense. And I love that you've mentioned that sometimes the problem is with us, the young people, for not being able to speak out. And that actually reminds me of some of the points that came up in last week's episode, where again, these are the type of things that we acknowledge to say we can't just put this whole black tax thing squarely on our parents or our guardians who have these expectations. But we also need to step up where we can't do something and make it very clear. And so I was going to share this towards the end, but it seems to fit well into the conversation now. So I'm going to bring up these points and then we're going to discuss how realistic it is to say you are able to do these things with your parental figure or with your guardians and siblings. So When it comes to finding balance as far as black tax is concerned, I came across a source that gave different pointers for how you can actually begin to do this. So the first thing was to define your cash flow. Figure out, me as an individual, where is my money coming in and where is it going out? What am I spending on? What are my priorities, right? And have a very clear list of those things before you decide that, okay, I'm going to give away this much money to whoever asks me. The second thing, I've already tied it in with the first one, which is define your financial priorities. And then the third thing, when it comes to actually supporting your family and engaging with your family, is to encourage financial independence and empower financial knowledge. So, not just putting yourself in a situation where every single time you're dishing out cash, a problem comes, you're dishing out cash, but you're actually trying to empower them in one way or another, helping them to see, okay, how else can this problem be solved, not necessarily with cash? How else can they begin to make some form of income that can help them without you having to come every single month giving out money, whether it's a monthly thing or these random black tax, quote in quotes, black tax requests that come up without you actually being prepared. And then the next thing is to set clear expectations and to, as I've already said, offer solutions instead of cash. And another key thing here is to avoid loans. Avoid taking loans for you to meet these obligations because now you're just digging yourself into a deeper hole. And just to add on to that before I finish, is I think sometimes a lot of people, especially where they've been raised by guardians other than their biological parents, feel indebted to them to such an extent that they subconsciously take on the burden by themselves. You know, your aunt or your sekuru, whoever it is, didn't ask you for all these things, but you personally feel almost guilty that they helped to raise you, that they provided for you. And so you're automatically thinking, okay, what can I do to pay them back? And yet, if we're looking at family and the whole concept of Ubuntu and Christianity, that's not the way that it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to owe the people who raised you.
You're so right, Shemi. So, like on the last point on it being a subconscious, like prison cell that one enters and struggles to get out of, and ends up seeing their action of giving as a an obligation that is weighing them down so hard. When initially the reason why your family and whoever stepped up to help you was from a center point of love and trying to get you to the next level, because this is the whole this I think this was the original concept of ubuntu in black tax, if you're going to put it in quotation marks. It's about lifting you up to the next level. I lift you up, I help you balance, and then you start taking the steps to the next level. But then it's like it's that prison cell that one enters out of guilt and sometimes out of shame, that then it becomes a burden, when you have said you've made an obligation that you're going to contribute so much a month to the upkeep of whoever it was who took care of you. Then every time that responsibility comes up, you start thinking, oh, it's such a burden, and they don't stop, they want this and they want that. It's because you haven't understood the biggest concept behind that. It's coming from a standpoint of love and nothing else. And this was done to enable you to get to the next level. So whether you give them back today, tomorrow, next week, they're really not really waiting with a knife at your head and saying you should pay back. No, they're trying to teach you that we are training you up so that you can take care of the people to come. That is the whole concept of Ubuntu in Black Tax. We are giving each other a place of belonging. We're lifting each other to the next level and to the next level so that the next person can then carry on the tradition. It's not a burden. And I love the fact that you talked about planning and also empowering. The problem is we need to break out of that culture of receiving, of maitabasa, maita shaonekwa, and getting into a point whereby it's maitabasa, thank you, and I am coming back with the results and I'm saying, Shami, your investment, this is what I made and this is what I've done for cousin X. I've also helped, I invested in cousin X, and now cousin X has also started a business or has started something that she's doing. And now that way, it's no longer a burden. That way we are now starting to create generational wealth because we're pushing people to start thinking outside the box. That it's not always about, thank you, Maitabasa, I've received the money, thank you. But it's like, I've received the money, this is what I've done with the money. I've managed to do one, two, three, four, and then I've also managed to help and cousin X, who's also was trying to figure out how to start off a business. Cousin X has bought stock and cousin X is flourishing. And then cousin X starts helping cousin Y as we go, as we go. So I think that's how we need to start thinking about it now. It's we need to start breaking it down and not seeing it as a burden, and understanding that in the beginning it was from a place of love. And whoever has been helped by a relative should not be put in this cage. They did it out of love. They did it out of love. And sometimes some situations are a bit tricky, we understand. But the biggest motivational factor should have been love, and should be love, and should always be love.
I think you brought up a very interesting point, Yvonne, when you said something about planning as well. I think, firstly, it's important to give people in a way that they are able to help themselves in the future. It's pointless always just dishing money, particularly to to the younger generation, like your siblings or your nephews and nieces, because you're not teaching them anything, if that makes sense. In as much as you're helping them, you're not helping them to become sustainable. What happens when you're not there one day? Um, they won't be able to support themselves. I think it's important that we find ways to help people so that they get to a point where they themselves can help themselves. Obviously, with our parents, it'll be completely different because they're at an age where they can't be necessarily doing much. They're looking at the sunset of their lives. So those people, it's just a matter of who knows how many years God blesses them with, whatever is remaining on this earth. So that should not be as painful. But I think one of the things that I've seen in even in the diaspora with certain communities is that you'll find certain communities like the Indian community, they're very good about, like what you said, I help you, you help the next person. So for example, if I bring you overseas, when you come and you start working, you're supposed to bring cousin so and so now overseas. And then they end up forming their little tribe. If so and so acquires a skill that manages to get them to go overseas, then they'll make sure they share the contacts and the skills with the next person, and that person is obliged to bring someone overseas. At the end of the day, we're empowering each other to become independent and to get to a certain stage. But another factor that I've just thought about as you were speaking was a lot of the times when you start taking on certain financial burdens within the family, you're single and you're perhaps don't have as many responsibilities. So it's easier and to give money. And sometimes you find that you start giving a certain amount because you're feeling guilty or because you can. And then suddenly in comes a partner and potentially children down the road. And a lot of the times people will blame the partner. Could see, oh, so and so when before he got married, he was so generous, and now he's stingy. It's the wife, but sometimes it's not even the wife. Sometimes he probably didn't even tell his wife that I was giving X amount when before you came, but now a person married, the money is not balancing because his income has not changed because he got married. His income is exactly the same. But now he has kids, he has school fees and all this burden. And sometimes it's also as relatives, we're not very understanding of the fact that someone's dynamics have changed. Their money does no longer stretches the way it used to stretch. And then we start blaming the other person who came into their lives. So I will say generally as family, and especially if you're young, you should not feel entitled to anyone's money. Get the support you can get from them, and be very understanding that this is I'm not their child. I don't know if that makes sense. You're not their child. You need to be also coming to look for help from your siblings in a way that will enable you to empower yourself. It's one thing to say, Sisi, can you send me money to get my hair done? And I promise you, the sister gets annoyed, I'm sure, after like 3 months or every month, I'm sending you money for your hair. Really? You haven't made a plan for your hair, Nanasi? But if you're coming to your support person and saying, hey, I need support financially. I found this course that I want to do, or I found myself a place at the university of whatever, and these are my plans, but I need X amount of money. You might find they might be willing to even give you a large amount of money because they know Guti, a few years down the road, you're going to be independent and be able to support yourself, and you will help the family at large because it also removes a certain burden off them. So I mean, it's really give this the whole black tax and supporting family issue is very nuanced. There are a lot of nuances to it, but I think it's very important to try and get to a point of empowering the people you're supporting and they themselves empowering themselves to not necessarily need to rely on that person.
Okay, so we've essentially established that it is possible to work through these steps where the younger generation is concerned. So, nieces, nephews, cousins, siblings. That's very doable. We're almost kind of close in age, maybe, for a lot of people. So, it's very easy to do to set those boundaries, to help to empower them and teach them what they need to know about finances, which, mind you, means that we need to be knowledgeable ourselves about finances. And I don't know how many young people can say that they've reached a stage where they're comfortable with the amount of knowledge they have as far as finances, investments, savings are concerned. But anyway, my question then is this possible where our parents are concerned? Because as Karen, as you said, they're now looking at their final however many years. So how possible is it to use these same steps on them, particularly where we're talking about encouraging independence and empowering them with financial knowledge? Like, they're old. What are they going to do?
Oh, it's tricky. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a 50-50. I will say for the most part, like I said, I don't think any parents wants to be a burden to their child. Every parent wants to be independent. I think that's unless you're a terrible parent or you're just lazy. For any hardworking parent, they genuinely did not see themselves getting to this age where they have to ask their child for money. So that said, I think it's hard. And as a child, you need to be able to see where your parents are struggling and give them the support they need. But at the same time, that said, I think for those parents, like now in our generation, because there are certain mistakes that our parents made, a lot of it due to lack of financial literacy. When I say financial literacy, I don't mean they didn't go to school to do finance. I'm talking about day to day making the right decisions around planning your retirement and, planning things adequately. I'll say, for example, we watched our parents invest in the stock market, invest in these pensions twice, and they got wiped out. Surely they should have learned the first time, Kuti, that money was basically not going to work in those investments were not going to work out, and that the country was a high risk area. But because we've seen their mistakes, and even those who are now in their 40s, 50s, I think the big thing now is how can you best plan your retirement in such a way that if we given changes within the economy, they won't affect your passive income when you're now retired. And some of this goes down to choosing to invest in properties. But at the same time, a lot of our parents, no offense, would go and buy Zimba Zigma location or go and be like, oh, I have a house for the sake of having a house. But that's not necessarily good investment property because now you are renting $20 or you're getting rented $50, and that's not enough to sustain the lifestyle that you are used to, or at least live a comfortable life in the house that you've chosen to retire in. Because sometimes it might be a big house, and that $50 is just enough for your electrical bill, it doesn't even cover food. So it's making the right, wise decisions as you're planning for your retirement. And it's something that even us at our age, I mean, we're in our 30s, but you don't start planning for retirement. And I know I saw this even in our parents' generation. A lot of them start planning for retirement 5 years before they retire. Heck, I've seen people planning for retirement the year that they're going to retirement. Suddenly they're looking for a business to do. And you're like, no, it's too late at that stage. Retirement is exactly what it is. You're supposed to be retired, effectively not doing much. But now you're trying to start a business at 64 or 65
Or start
in
farming?
an area, yeah, or in an area you're not versed in. Like, let's be honest, I'm an accountant and then now I'm farming, but I have no skills. I've not even acquired the skills just because my father very much baggy. Suddenly I think I'll be a competent Chiba game farmer. Yet I've spent the last 50 years doing accounts. So
Yeah.
it's those little things where you're like, we've now seen these mistakes. Plan for retirement now. You're in your 30s, you know that you're going to retire at 65, let's just say. And in your head, you'll be like, okay, at least I want to survive until 80. So what can I do to have income over those 15 years? And then at the same time, a lot of parents get caught up in things like, oh, I want to leave properties for my children. So some of them will have alternative sources of income, but then maybe not so great. You have that house, Yekugeto, where it's paying you $50, but you keep holding on to that house and living. Usinamari echingwa. Sometimes you need to just ask yourself, is it worthwhile leaving my children this house here $50, or am I not better off selling that house and having income to sustain me during my retirement so that I'm not a burden to my children? And yes, maybe when I die they'll be left with the one house that I was living in, but what's the wiser decision for myself? Because sometimes we might think we're leaving assets to our children, but those kids actually don't want that asset, or they won't even use it wisely, or it will be of no substance because maybe the child is like me, they're not in the country to begin with, so they have no use for that asset. So you're better off selling it and actually enjoying your retirement years, which you got your money from what you invested in during those years. So it's all about what's the best way to plan for your retirement, and let's do it early and let's make wise decisions. If you're in Zimbabwe, don't go put your money in the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. In as much as, yes, we say people make money from the stock exchange, but it's a very small portion of people who make money from the stock exchanges, particularly in Zimbabwe, let alone even overseas. So try and find something that will give you the passive income you need. And when you still don't have a lot of money, try and find things that are low risk, that where you won't lose your money in trying to invest in those things, and start planning now. But like you said, Shami, so I think right now, given everything and where we are in Zimbabwe, for our current parents' generation, there's not much they can do. But I think the lesson has been learned for the future generations and those who are planning to go into retirement on what we can do better to prepare ourselves.
And just tagging on to that, I think could one of the things, especially for our generation, not be learning to live within your means? Because
Yeah.
I feel like with a lot of people, or maybe our parents' generation, it was more common for people to make such crazy sacrifices. And I'll speak specifically for Zimbabweans to make crazy, crazy sacrifices as far as taking their children to, your group A schools and the best university and wherever, wherever, knowing very well that it's a struggle. Like you actually can't afford it. You're digging yourself into a hole. And I think at sometimes this is actually what then makes people expect a lot when it comes to looking at the person that they've provided for and how they can feed back into their lives, because it's like, hey, ndakakuyendesa ku wherever, wherever, do you know how much money I spent on you? I didn't have to do that. I could have sent you to another school. I'm like, so why didn't you do that then?
Yeah.
That's deep. And it's true.
And it's like we ignore it a lot, and it's one of the bad habits, bad parenting habits we have inherited over the years. Because you need to understand that this culture, Shami, of trying to get our kids in the group A schools and the best what did not start now. It all started back in the days when it was all about, I wanted to show them that I have made it. But you have made it at what cost? Live within your means. Think about the future. Why don't you send them to a good school, and then invest in their university while you're saving up? So what's literally happening is that there's a button stick system that is being established. Their kids are watching what parents do, and then they're just doing copy paste. In our generation now, what they did. living outside their means and not realizing that this at the end of the day comes to bite you and as the individual in the backside. Because I don't think parents actually sat down with their kids and said, guys, I made a wrong decision by sending you to this schools. We could have saved a little bit more money and done this and that and been able to take care of one, two, three, four, and not have had this burden of now, the in-laws expecting this, sekuru, aunt there, uncle there, expecting help at that level, and we can't do it. And the other thing is, just to add on to that, is that we also need to realize that we cannot save everyone, right? We
Mm.
cannot save everyone. In the words of Arthur Marara, he says a lot about no one's coming. This whole thing that people are sitting around expecting that somebody somewhere, a relative, has an obligation to get them out of their financial mess when they have chosen to live outside their means is not going to work. Nobody's coming. You cannot be everybody's savior. So you need to be able to know what your boundaries are. Be very realistic. Set smart goals. Set things that are reasonable, right? Set reasonable things. Sit down with your family, right? It doesn't mean that I'm driving a BMW, I have money, guys. No, I also have responsibility. This BMW needs money. I need to pay insurance. I need to pay back for the car. And I still have to live in an apartment to sustain and a life to live. You, as the individual who is the one who is giving back, you first of all need to educate yourself and be realistic of your situation to begin with. It's nice to have all of these fancy things and have these flamboyant lifestyles, but at what cost? So then it becomes a burden because you have set unrealistic goals, first of all, for yourself. So then your family is expecting unrealistic expectations. And we need to stop this button stick exchange system and start sitting down and having real financial conversations. I love the fact that Karen talked about financial literacy. It's not only just for our parents, but it's even for our generation right now. Remember in our previous episode, Shami, we were talking about the debate of buying a house before buying a car or buying a car before a house, that big debate and all of that. So people's choices are being based on something that they half the time people are trying to run away from a situation. It's because I never really had a very nice house, so now I want a very nice house now. But is it realistic for your future? Because remember, your responsibilities are not going to go away. What you need to then contribute at the end of the day, it becomes a burden because first of all, you are not smart about what you are looking at right now and where you are going. So it's that people need to start to have hard, real conversations with self to begin with, and then spread the love around.
Whew, I think that's deep because I was just thinking about it. Generally, I think as Black people, it's just hard, man. And it's hard. Like it's hard to find that balance because remember, most people grew up in the struggle,
Yeah.
so we're as good at. I don't know if you know this show in South Africa that they have. I Blew It, where they're basically profiling people who grew up in poorer backgrounds and then they finally win the lottery and then now they are how they blew through the money without using it for anything sensible. And I often say this to my friends, and I'm like, you need to realize that a lot of Black people these days are as good as people who won the lottery because they've grown up poor. So suddenly, when you do have money, you're like, man, I can afford a BMW. I'm buying it. You don't even think about some of these obligations that you have. Or I have enough money to send my child to that school, so I'm gonna do it. So now when you then reach 60, 65, you're like, okay, I don't have certain things that I need set up in place for retirement because you got carried away in life despite having a lot of money, making bad financial decisions. But at the time, they didn't seem so bad. But at the same time, there's also that need to strike a balance. You cannot solve all our what's it called, intergenerational problems in one generation. Life is also short. So in doing everything, you also want to live a good life where you're like, okay, I lived. If I was to wake up not here on this earth tomorrow, at least I wasn't just frugal and saving money for those who will live after me to have money, and yet I lived a very sad life. There needs to be a balance somewhere in between. And I think that's the hard part. And I mean, even for myself, it's something I've come to realize that in as much as there are certain things you might want in life, you need to find some to live somewhere in the middle. And in living somewhere in the middle, it's little things like you realize what's important to me. Are you someone who cares about the things that people see externally, or are you more of someone who cares about their internal lifestyle? For me personally, it's about living comfortably within the house and eating nice food. That's just me. So when I build my budget, I build my budget around being able to have that at least. I don't care about the outside of my life and what other people see because that's just not me. But for other people, they care more about what people see. So figure out who you are, strike a balance somewhere in the middle. But remember, one day you're going to retire. Remember, there are people you want to support financially and live somewhere in there while balancing all those things and also having a good and comfortable life.
Do we even need to say more? I feel like you've essentially just closed off the session with some very, very good points.
Mhm. No, honestly, I think maybe we just need to hit on and hammer more on the issue of retirement plans, guys. That is essential. Like Karen, you've emphasized it over and over again. There is absolutely no way we are going to start creating generational wealth if we do not plan. Not planning is planning to fail, period. So let's not live in this nice bubbled up life of, oh no, and blame it all on black tax, blame it all on my parents are demanding too much. What have you done as an individual? Right? We can't right now. I think it's too late for us to go back and fault the wrongs of our parents, but we have the power, we have the authority to change the future. We do have the keys. And in the digital age that we're living in, it's quite ridiculous for us to be in this place where we can say we don't know what to do. I did not know the internet is for free. That okay, it's not really for free, but information is for free. You just need to look for it and make smart goals. Be realistic about your picture. Paint your picture clearly and wow. And let's start giving in a different way by putting that emphasis on putting responsibility on people, right? Responsibility by giving them power, enabling them to understand that, okay, I'm working to make this money, but I want to enable you, I want to empower you. I want you to take responsibility of your financial situation going forward. I'm investing in you. You invest in others. Like clearly like what Karen and our previous guest did say, Neto, they emphasized on the Indian culture being it's all about let's uplift the others. And I don't think it's only with Indians. I think our fellow African counterparts do that a lot. They do that passing on. So we need to start thinking about black tax differently and what it means. And like I said, I really don't like using the word black tax actually. I think we should just find whoever started this movement should find a positive connotation to that, and we need to start taking ownership of our journeys, ownership of what it is that we need to do as an African people, as Christians, as Vanwani Huno.
And my closing remarks are just going to be around the issue of balance, which has come up in this conversation. It came up in last week's conversation. Find a balance. Balance where you are building up for your future, yes, and you're also giving where you can, living within your means, ensuring that as much as you're taking care of others who may now be in a somewhat disadvantaged position, or maybe you just enjoy pampering your parents or the people who raised you, that's fine, but find a balance.
That's right. That's right. Find a balance. So, thank you very much to our listeners for joining us on our journey. Thank you, Karen, for joining us in the studio and having this conversation with us. We would love to know what are your thoughts? What did you get? What are the nuggets you got from this conversation? We would like to engage with you. So, feel free to engage with us on our social platforms, on our Facebook page, or even on any SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you are finding our podcast and you're listening it from. We would like to engage with you and get your understanding on this. If you have stories to share, experiences that you have pertaining to black tax or any other topics that we talk about, we would love you to join on the train. So thank you very much for having us today. I am Yvonne.
I'm Shami.
Thank you for having us, and we'll see you on the next go around.